The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, its golden sands shimmering beneath the blazing sun. There was nothing here but the wind, dry and unforgiving, whispering across the barren landscape. For most people, this was a place to be avoided. But for one lone wanderer, it was a place of solitude, a place where answers could be found or lost. As the wanderer trekked across the desert, each step heavy in the thick heat, they noticed something unusual. It was a small figure, lying motionless just ahead, half buried in the sand. At first, the wanderer thought it was just another piece of debris left behind by the harsh conditions of the desert. But as they drew closer, they realized it was something, or rather someone, alive, a child. The wanderer's heart skipped a beat. The child was small, no more than 6 or 7 years old, their body covered in dust and sand. The skin was a pale shade, unlike anything the wanderer had seen before, almost like a faint blue-gray. It was impossible to tell whether the child was injured, but there was no mistaking the signs of distress. The child was alone, and worse, the desert was no place for someone so young. Kneeling down beside the child, the wanderer gently brushed the sand from their face. The child's eyes fluttered open for a moment, revealing an unusual, vibrant color, something between a bright silver and a pale blue, like 2 small stars trapped in their tiny face. The child blinked several times, clearly disoriented, and gasped for breath, as if trying to understand where they were. "Hey," the wanderer whispered softly, their voice filled with both concern and confusion. "Are you all right?" The child didn't answer. Instead, they winced and attempted to sit up, their small hands pushing weakly against the ground. It was clear they were exhausted and probably dehydrated. The wanderer reached into their bag for the small water bottle they carried, offering it to the child. "Here, take this." The child stared at the bottle for a long moment, then slowly accepted it, their small hands trembling. They drank greedily, as if they'd been without water for days. The wanderer watched with a mixture of curiosity and worry. Who was this child? How had they ended up here in the middle of nowhere? And more importantly, why were they so different? Once the child finished drinking, they looked up at the wanderer, their face still a mixture of confusion and fear. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, they spoke. "Where am I?" The wanderer was taken aback. The child spoke fluent human language, but their accent was strange, foreign, almost melodic, and their words seemed to carry an odd, unnatural weight. The wanderer furrowed their brow. This was no ordinary child. "You're in the desert," the wanderer said, still kneeling beside the child. "I'm going to help you. You're safe now." The child nodded slowly, their gaze flicking around the barren landscape as though they were trying to understand their surroundings. There was a moment of silence between them, the only sound being the gentle breeze stirring the sand. "Where's my father?" the child asked, their voice trembling. The wanderer's heart skipped again. A father? Was there anyone else out here? The desert was vast, and unless the child's father was nearby, it didn't seem possible that someone would have left a child alone in such a place. "I don't know," the wanderer replied softly, not wanting to make promises they couldn't keep. "We'll find him, don't worry." The child didn't respond. Instead, they closed their eyes for a moment, as if concentrating. The wanderer, unsure of what to make of the situation, scanned the horizon. There was no sign of another person for miles, but the child's next words made the wanderer pause. "I'm lost," the child said again, this time more forcefully. "But I'm not supposed to be here. I need to go home." The wanderer stood up, looking down at the child. They hadn't realized it before, but there was something in the child's eyes, something that seemed to shimmer with an unnatural light, something that seemed alien. The wanderer extended a hand to the child, helping them to their feet. "All right, let's get you somewhere safe. We'll figure this out together." As the child steadied themselves, they gave the wanderer a grateful look. There was something different about them, something otherworldly. It wasn't just their eyes or the strange way they spoke. It was something in the air around them, something faint, almost imperceptible. The child was special. "Thank you," the child murmured, their voice so soft that the wanderer almost missed it. "You don't know how much this means to me." The wanderer hesitated for a moment. "I don't know how much this means either," they said, "but I'll do my best to help." They helped the child stand, and together they began the long walk toward shelter. The desert felt endless, and the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting the sky in hues of pink and orange. The wanderer couldn't help but wonder who the child really was, and why they were out here alone in such a hostile place. There were many questions, but one thing was for certain: the answers would come soon enough. But as the child walked beside them, their small hand in the wanderer's grasp, something deep inside told them this was no ordinary child. And the story of how they ended up in the desert would be more than anyone could have ever imagined. The night had fallen when they reached the edge of the desert, and the temperature dropped quickly. The wanderer led the child into a small cave they had spotted earlier, a shelter from the cold winds that howled across the barren land. The child seemed exhausted, their steps slow and unsteady, but they were determined to keep going. The wanderer had a feeling that they needed to move quickly. Something about the child made them uneasy, as if the desert wasn't the only danger they were facing. Inside the cave, the air was cool but still, and the wanderer quickly gathered some dry twigs to start a fire. As the flames flickered to life, the child sat down against the wall, curling up on a small patch of dry earth. Their large, strange eyes were focused on the fire, but they didn't speak for several minutes. The wanderer watched them closely, wondering what they were thinking, trying to make sense of what had just happened. "Are you all right?" the wanderer asked gently, sitting a few feet away from the child, their voice calm and reassuring. The child's gaze shifted from the flames to the wanderer. There was a deep sadness in their eyes, something that seemed far beyond their years. For a moment, the wanderer wondered if this child might be more than they seemed, if they were part of something much bigger, something they didn't fully understand. I'm okay," the child answered after a pause. Their voice was soft, almost as if they were speaking to themselves more than to the wanderer. "But I don't belong here, this place. It's not my home." The wanderer nodded, not entirely sure what to say. They were feeling a growing sense of responsibility for the child, but they still had no idea who they were or where they came from. And yet they couldn't bring themselves to leave them alone. Something about the child, something intangible, told them that they couldn't turn their back on them. "You'll be all right," the wanderer said, offering a reassuring smile. "We'll figure this out." The child nodded, but they didn't look convinced. Instead, they closed their eyes as if trying to gather their thoughts. The wanderer, feeling a little awkward, sat back and stared into the fire, wondering what would happen next. There was something deeply unsettling about the situation. The child was obviously lost and out of place, but the strange connection the wanderer felt to them was undeniable. Then, without warning, the child spoke again, their voice barely above a whisper. "He'll come for me." The words were chilling. The wanderer looked over, surprised at the certainty in the child's voice. "Who will come for you?" the wanderer asked, their voice careful. The child didn't respond right away, and the fire crackled softly in the silence. After a long pause, they looked up at the wanderer, their expression unreadable. "My father," the child said, their tone soft but steady. "He's not like the others. He'll come. He has to." The wanderer was silent for a moment, unsure of how to respond. It was hard to believe, but there was something about the child that felt special. Something that made the wanderer feel like there was more to this story than they knew. They knew they couldn't ask too many questions. They had to be patient, let the child speak when they were ready. "You don't have to worry," the wanderer said, trying to keep their voice steady. "We'll figure out what to do next." The child seemed comforted by these words, but there was still a sense of unease that lingered in the air. As the fire burned low, The child continued to stare into the flames, their face illuminated by the soft glow. The wanderer couldn't help but wonder what they had gotten themselves into. The desert was vast and unforgiving, and yet there was a feeling deep within them that this was no coincidence, that their paths had crossed for a reason. As the night stretched on, the child fell into an uneasy sleep. The wanderer, still wide awake, kept watch over them. The fire flickered, casting long shadows against the walls of the cave, and the wind howled outside, but the warmth of the flames kept the chill at bay. The stars above were distant, cold, points of light in the vast sky, and the wanderer found their thoughts drifting to the child's mysterious words. "He'll come for me." The wanderer couldn't shake the feeling that they were caught in something bigger than themselves, something that was still unfolding. The child had spoken as if they had no doubt their father would find them. The wanderer knew that finding someone in the desert was no easy feat. And if this child's father was as powerful as they claimed, what would that mean for the wanderer? A soft rustling sound broke the silence, and the wanderer turned their gaze toward the child. They had shifted in their sleep, and for a moment it looked like they might wake. But the child simply sighed softly and settled back down, their small body curling into a tighter ball. The wanderer let out a quiet breath and continued watching them. There was no turning back now. As the hours passed, the stars above the desert sky glittered like distant diamonds, and the fire crackled, sending small embers into the cool night air. The wanderer stayed alert, unsure of what would come next, but resolute in their determination to protect the child. Whoever they were, whatever they meant to the galaxy, the wanderer had no choice now. They had to keep the child safe, because, if they didn't, the consequences could be far more than just a desert journey gone wrong. The morning came quietly, with the first rays of the sun lighting up the desert in shades of gold and orange. The child, still curled up against the cave wall, stirred as the warmth of the sun touched their skin. The wanderer sat nearby, watching as the child began to wake. They had been restless through the night, shifting often, their face filled with a mixture of confusion and worry. When the child finally opened their eyes, they seemed disoriented for a moment, blinking against the light. The wanderer offered them water, and they drank deeply, still silent. The desert, now bathed in the soft glow of early morning, felt peaceful, but the tension in the air was undeniable. The child hadn't spoken much since their cryptic words about their father. The wanderer couldn't stop thinking about it. Who was this child? Who was their father? And why was the child so certain he would find them? "You all right?" the wanderer asked gently, their voice soft but full of concern. The child nodded slowly, their gaze still distant. "I'm fine," they replied, their voice quiet. "I'm just tired." The wanderer didn't press. They knew the child had been through something difficult, but there was still so much to understand. As the morning passed, they continued their journey, walking side by side through the desert, the child's hand firmly holding the wanderer's. The child didn't speak much, but the wanderer could feel the tension in the air, like something big was about to unfold. At one point, the child stopped walking, pulling Jean distant, even when I was with him. "I don't think he wanted me to be part of his empire. I think he was afraid of what I might become." "Afraid of what you might become?" The wanderer's voice was filled with curiosity. "Why would he be afraid?" The child looked down, their small hands clasped tightly in their lap. "Because I'm different. I have powers that I don't understand, powers that he fears. But he never to." But there was a sense of urgency in the wanderer's movements. They knew they couldn't waste time. Every moment they spent here, they were growing further away from safety. The child, though still quiet and withdrawn, walked beside the wanderer with a newfound determination. There was something different in their eyes, a flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough. As they moved, the child's eyes would occasionally dart around, scanning the horizon with the sharp awareness of someone who had grown up in a dangerous world, even if that world was far from this one. At night, they found shelter in caves or under the cover of rock formations, where they could hide from the cold desert winds. The child didn't sleep much, still haunted by the memories of their past. The wanderer kept watch, knowing the child needed time to heal, emotionally and physically. But they also knew that the longer they waited, the more dangerous things could get. The desert was unforgiving, and there was something lurking in the shadows, something that hadn't been fully revealed yet. After a few days of travel, the child spoke again, their voice barely above a whisper. "I've been here before." The wanderer glanced over at them, their curiosity piqued. "You've been here?" The child nodded slowly, their face distant. "A long time ago, when I was younger. I don't remember much, but I know I've been to this place. It feels familiar." The wanderer was silent for a moment, absorbing this new piece of information. "What happened here?" they asked, their voice gentle. The child's eyes glistened with the hint of unshed tears, but they quickly blinked them away. "I was left here, left alone to find my way." The wanderer's heart ached for the child. "You mean your father?" The child nodded again, their small shoulders slumping in exhaustion. "He didn't want me to stay. I was too much, too powerful, too different. So he sent me away. But I never understood why." The wanderer was shocked. The child's father, an emperor of an empire, had sent them away because they were too powerful? It didn't make sense. They were still a child, lost and vulnerable. Why would someone like that abandon their own flesh and blood? The questions only seemed to multiply. "You didn't deserve that," the wanderer said, their voice firm but kind. "You shouldn't have been left alone." The child remained quiet, the sadness in their eyes growing deeper. "I don't know if I can trust him anymore," they whispered. "He never told me the truth. I thought he cared, but now I'm not sure." The wanderer sat down beside the child, offering a comforting presence. "We'll find the answers. Whatever they are, we'll face them together." The child turned to look at them, their expression conflicted. "But what if the answers aren't what I want to hear?" The wanderer looked at the child with understanding. "You may not have a choice, but you'll never be alone in facing them. We'll deal with it together, no matter what." They sat in silence for a while, the desert stretching endlessly around them. The winds whispered softly, carrying with it the sound of something distant, something that was not entirely natural. The wanderer looked around, uneasy. It was just a feeling, but it was enough to make their senses heighten. Something was watching them. Something, or someone. "We need to keep moving," the wanderer said suddenly, standing up. They reached out to help the child, but before the child could respond, a distant sound broke through the stillness. A low, rumbling noise carried through the air, distant but unmistakable. "What is that?" the child asked, their voice filled with fear. The wanderer frowned, scanning the horizon. The sound seemed to be getting louder. It wasn't just the wind, it was something else, something mechanical. A ship? A vehicle? The wanderer had no idea, but they knew one thing. They needed to get out of the open. "Get up. We have to move. Now," the wanderer urged, pulling the child to their feet. They began to walk quickly, keeping an eye on the distance. The sound was growing closer, and the tension in the air was palpable. As they moved toward a nearby rocky formation for cover, the sound grew louder, more distinct. The wanderer's pulse quickened. Whoever was out there was getting closer, and they weren't taking any chances. The child had powers they didn't fully understand, but it was clear that they weren't safe out here, not without protection. The child's eyes widened as they heard the noise too. "They're coming for me, aren't they?" they whispered, their voice barely audible. The wanderer glanced down at the child, their face grim. "I don't know," they replied honestly. "But we'll be ready for whatever happens." They reached the rocky outcrop and crouched behind it, trying to stay out of sight. The sound continued to grow, now unmistakably close. The wanderer could hear the unmistakable hum of an engine, the sound of something large moving through the desert. The child gripped the wanderer's arm tightly, It's them, isn't it? My father's people. The wanderer didn't answer immediately. They weren't sure who it was, but the child was right to be afraid. The empire that the child spoke of was powerful, and if they were here, it meant they were getting closer to discovering the child's whereabouts. They had to be cautious. We stay hidden, the wanderer said firmly, crouching lower, keeping their breathing slow and controlled. We wait and see who it is. If it's your father's people, we'll figure out what to do. But for now, we stay quiet. The child nodded, their face pale, eyes wide with fear. But the wanderer could see the faint spark of hope in them too. They didn't know what was coming, but they knew they weren't alone anymore. The distant rumble grew louder still, and the wanderer's mind raced. What would they do next? What would this encounter bring? The sound of the approaching vehicle echoed through the desert, now unmistakably close. The hum of engines and the occasional clank of metal made the child's grip tighten on the wanderer's arm. Every muscle in the wanderer's body tensed, a mixture of anticipation and caution washing over them. This was it. Whoever had come for the child, they were now within reach. The wanderer glanced at the child, their face pale but set with a strange resolve. The wanderer had expected fear, and there was plenty of that in the child's eyes, but there was something else too. An emotion the wanderer hadn't anticipated. Curiosity. As if the child wanted, even needed, to know who these people were, what they would do. Stay close to me, the wanderer whispered, pulling the child closer as they crouched behind the rocks. The child nodded, not a word spoken, but their body language said everything. They were bracing themselves for whatever came next. The vehicle drew nearer, the sound of its engine vibrating through the ground. Beneath them, the wanderer's heart beat faster. Were these the child's father's people? Were they here to take the child back? Or was it something worse? The uncertainty gnawed at them, but they held their position, watching and waiting as the vehicle came into full view. It was unlike anything the wanderer had expected. It wasn't a traditional ship or military craft, but rather a large, sleek land cruiser with heavy armor plating. It was designed for rough terrain, built to withstand the harshest environments. The vehicle came to a slow stop, kicking up a cloud of dust that quickly settled around it. The sound of the engine faded, and the desert fell silent once more. Hatch opened on the side of the cruiser and two figures stepped out, their movement swift and purposeful. Both were tall, wearing matching dark uniforms, their faces obscured by helmets. Their presence was commanding, military perhaps, or at least elite. The wanderer's instincts told them these weren't ordinary travelers. These were people with power. The child's face tightened as they peered around the edge of the rock, their eyes locked on the figures. There was recognition in their gaze, but it was mixed with a deep uncertainty, as if the child wasn't sure whether to feel relief or fear. "Do you know them?" the wanderer whispered, keeping their voice barely audible. The child nodded slowly, their voice a mere whisper. "They work for him. For my father." The wanderer's heart sank. It seemed that the child's past was catching up to them faster than they had hoped. One of the figures moved forward, their steps measured. The other stayed behind, scanning the surroundings, seemingly on high alert. The wanderer stayed still, holding their breath, waiting for what would happen next. The child remained frozen, their eyes never leaving the figures. The first figure approached the rocks, their helmet reflecting the morning light. They didn't seem to notice the wanderer, and the child hiding focused instead on something ahead of them. The wanderer watched carefully, a quiet tension rising in the air. Whatever was about to happen, the wanderer knew it could change everything. The figure stopped a few feet from the rocks and crouched down, scanning the ground. The child inhaled sharply, then whispered, "He's looking for me." The wanderer glanced at the child. "Stay calm," they murmured. "We'll figure this out." For a moment, everything was still. The figure knelt down, checking the ground near where the wanderer and child had been traveling. Then, as if finding something of interest, the figure straightened up and turned to signal the other person. "We found a trail," the first figure said, their voice muffled through the helmet but still clearly audible. "He's close." The second figure nodded and approached the vehicle, saying something that the Wanderer couldn't hear. After a moment, they both returned to the cruiser, and the sound of the hatch closing filled the silence. The vehicle's engines roared back to life, kicking up more sand as it slowly turned and began to drive away. The hum of the engine grew, faint, and the Wanderer could breathe again. For a long moment, neither the Wanderer nor the child spoke. The only sound was the wind gently stirring the sand. Finally, the child exhaled deeply, the tension leaving their body. "They're gone." The Wanderer nodded, but they weren't relieved. "Do you think they'll come back?" The child shook their head slowly, their eyes still scanning the horizon. "They might, but not yet." The Wanderer stayed quiet, processing what had just happened. The appearance of these figures, their clear connection to the child's father, left them with more questions than answers. It was clear that whoever the child's father was, he had a presence that stretched far and wide, one that could send people to find his son, even in the vast desert. But the child's hesitation in recognizing the figures as his people hinted at a more complex relationship. "Your father?" the Wanderer began, keeping their voice gentle. "Does he know you're alive?" The child looked at the ground, avoiding the Wanderer's eyes. "I don't know," they whispered. "He never told me the truth. Maybe he doesn't even care." The Wanderer could see the hurt in the child's eyes, a pain deeper than anything they could understand. Abandoned by their father, unsure of who they could trust, the child was caught between worlds. The world they had come from, a world of power and fear, and the world they were now in, a world where they were just a child trying to survive. The Wanderer placed a hand on the child's shoulder. "I don't know what your father's like, but I do know this. You're not alone anymore. I'm here, and I'll help you." The child looked up, their eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and relief. For a moment it felt as if they might finally believe it, might finally believe that someone cared enough to protect them. The wind picked up again, sweeping across the desert as the two of them stood there in silence. Ahead of them lay an uncertain future, but for the first time in a long while the child felt something like hope. A small, fragile thing, but hope nonetheless. They still had a long way to go, but together they might just have a chance. The desert stretched out before them, vast and empty. But the events of the past few days had left the Wanderer feeling anything but peaceful. They couldn't shake the feeling that something was closing in around them, something far bigger than either they or the child could handle. The encounter with the two figures had made it clear that the child's past was coming back to haunt them. They were no longer just a lost child in the desert. The child was the heir to something far greater, a power that could reach across galaxies. As they moved toward the nearest settlement, the weight of the situation felt heavier with each step. The Wanderer kept their eyes on the horizon, their thoughts clouded with the uncertainty of what might come next. Every time they looked at the child, they saw something different, more than just a scared, lost kid. There was a quiet strength there, a resilience that only came from having survived something unimaginable. "We're almost there," the Wanderer said, trying to break the silence. "We'll find a safe place and you can rest. You've been through a lot." The child nodded, but their eyes remained fixed on the ground. They hadn't spoken much since the encounter with the two figures. The Wanderer could tell the child was lost in thought, struggling with the weight of everything they had learned about their past. The Empire, the father, the powers they didn't fully understand. All of it was too much for someone so young to bear. But before the Wanderer could say anything more, a loud roar broke through the silence. It was distant at first, but quickly, growing closer. The sound of heavy engines and the crunch of metal against sand. The child stiffened, their body immediately tense. "They're coming," the child said, their voice low and filled with dread. "They know we're here." The Wanderer's heart sank. The figures from earlier had returned, and this time they weren't alone. The child's father's empire was closing in, and the Wanderer knew they had no time to waste. They needed to act fast. The Wanderer grabbed the child's arm, pulling them toward a small rock formation for cover. "Stay down," they whispered urgently. "Don't move." The two of them crouched, behind the rocks, trying to remain unseen as the roar of the engines grew louder. The wind kicked up sand in the air, making it harder to see, but the sound of the vehicles was unmistakable. There was no mistaking it now. The figures had brought reinforcements, and they were coming straight for them. The Wanderer's mind raced. There had to be a way out of this. They couldn't fight an entire empire, not alone, and certainly not with a child who had no experience in combat. They had to think. They had to. Suddenly, the child spoke again, their voice trembling. "I can stop them." The Wanderer looked at the child, their eyes wide with disbelief. "What? Do you mean? How? You're not ready?" "I have to," the child interrupted, their voice firm now. "I have no choice. They won't stop until they find me." The Wanderer shook their head, panic rising in their chest. "You don't understand. You're just a child. You can't face them." But the child's eyes were fierce, filled with a determination the Wanderer hadn't seen before. "I'm not just a child," they said quietly. "I'm not like them, but I'm not weak. I have powers that I don't know how to control. But I have them. I can do this." The Wanderer stared at the child for a long moment, unsure of what to say. They had no idea what the child was capable of, but they couldn't deny the fear and strength in their eyes. The Wanderer could see it now. The child wasn't just trying to survive. They were trying to protect something, someone. And that made them stronger than anyone could understand. Before the Wanderer could respond, the child stood up, stepping away from the rocks. Their body was tense, their fists clenched at their sides. The Wanderer reached out to stop them, but the child shook their head. "I have to do this," the child said, their voice quiet but filled with a power the Wanderer hadn't expected. The child closed their eyes, focusing on something deep within themselves. The air around them seemed to shift, the desert wind momentarily stilling. A soft glow, barely visible at first, began to emanate from the child's body. It was faint, but growing stronger, radiating outwards like a ripple in the air. The Wanderer watched in stunned silence, their heart racing. They had no idea what the child was doing, but there was something undeniably powerful about it, something that felt like the earth itself was bending to their will. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the glow disappeared, leaving only the soft hum of energy in the air. The child opened their eyes, their gaze focused and determined. The sound of the vehicles grew louder, closer now. The child's eyes narrowed, and the Wanderer could see the subtle shift in their expression. Confidence, replacing the fear. "We'll be ready for them," the child said, their voice steady. The Wanderer took a deep breath, still unsure but unwilling to back down. "All right. We do this together." They both emerged from their hiding place, facing the approaching vehicles. The child stood tall, their small body now radiating an aura of calm strength. The Wanderer stood beside them, ready to face whatever came. The first vehicle came into view, its heavy wheels crunching over the desert sand. The child didn't move, their eyes fixed on the machine as it drew nearer. The Wanderer could feel the tension in the air, the feeling that something big was about to happen. As the vehicle stopped in front of them, the figures from before stepped out. They were flanked by several more soldiers, all dressed in dark armor. The leader of the group, the same figure who had approached earlier, stepped forward. They stopped when they saw the child, their face hidden behind a helmet. "You," the leader said, their voice muffled but unmistakable. "You should have come with us peacefully, but it seems you've made your choice." The child didn't flinch. "I'll never go back with you." The leader's voice grew colder. "You don't understand. You are needed. The Empire needs you. Your father will not allow you to remain in exile." The child stood their ground, their fists clenched. "I don't care about the Empire, I'm not like him." The leader paused for a moment, studying the child closely. Then they motioned to the soldiers, and the air seemed to crackle with tension. But the child wasn't afraid. They had made their decision. The wanderer stepped forward, ready for whatever came next. The battle was just beginning. The tension in the desert was thick. The vehicles, now fully stopped in front of the child and the wanderer, loomed like shadows in the scorching heat. The child stood firm, their small body trembling, slightly but not from fear. No, it was determination. Their eyes, still filled with an unspoken resolve, were locked on the soldiers who had surrounded them. They had come for the child, but now the child was ready to face them, not as someone lost and weak, but as someone who had discovered their strength. The leader of the group, the same figure who had first approached them in the desert, stepped forward. The figure's presence was intimidating, their dark armor glistening under the harsh sunlight, but the child didn't flinch. Instead, they squared their shoulders and met the leader's gaze. "You think you can stop me?" The child's voice was steady, but carried a weight that surprised the wanderer. It was clear that whatever had been dormant inside the child was now fully awakened. The leader, whose face was hidden behind a helmet, took a step closer, their boots making a dull sound on the desert sand. "We don't want to fight you," the leader said, their voice muffled but sharp. "You are a part of something much bigger than yourself. You were meant to lead, to restore order to the empire." The child shook their head slowly. "I don't want any part of it. I've seen enough to know that I don't belong in a world built on fear." The words hung in the air, powerful in their simplicity. The leader paused, as if considering the child's statement. The soldiers around them shifted uneasily, clearly not used to hearing such defiance. The wanderer stood beside the child, watching the scene unfold. They couldn't deny the sense of awe they felt. The child wasn't just surviving anymore. They were taking control, making choices and standing firm against forces that had once been beyond their understanding. Whatever powers the child possessed, they were more than just a weapon of the empire. They were someone capable of changing the very world they had been born into. "We are not your enemies," the leader continued, their tone softer now, though the underlying threat still lingered. "Your father sent us to bring you home. He is not the monster you think he is. He's trying to protect you, even if you cannot see it. He only wants what is best for you." The child's expression softened, but only slightly. They seemed to be weighing the leader's words, and for a moment the wanderer feared they might waver. But then the child spoke again, their voice full of conviction. "I don't want to be a tool for anyone. I don't want to be controlled. I've seen how power destroys people, and I won't let it happen to me. I choose my own path." There was a long silence. The leader remained still, their helmet facing the child, but their eyes, hidden behind the visor, were unreadable. The atmosphere felt thick, as if the air itself was holding its breath. The wanderer stepped forward, standing tall beside the child. "What happens now?" they asked, their voice calm but firm. "If the child refuses to go with you, what are you going to do?" The leader looked at the wanderer, their gaze sharp. "We'll return to the empire with or without the child," the leader said coldly. "But we would prefer not to use force. You have no idea what this child is capable of." The child looked up at the wanderer, their eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resolve. "I don't want to go with them, but I don't want to hurt anyone either. I don't know how to control this power, but I can feel it inside me. It's like a storm waiting to break free." The wanderer nodded, understanding. They didn't want the child to face this alone, but the child had made up their mind. They were no longer just running from their past. They were facing it, even if it meant defying everything they had ever known. "We won't let them take you," the wanderer said softly, their voice steady with confidence. "Whatever happens next, we face it together." The child nodded, their small fists clenched at their sides. They closed their eyes for a moment, as if gathering the strength within them. The air around them seemed to grow heavier, charged with an energy that the wanderer could feel even from a distance. The child was unlocking something deep inside them that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. Without warning, the child stepped forward, their small form suddenly radiating power. The ground beneath their feet trembled and the air shimmered with energy. The soldiers took an instinctive step back, unsure of what was happening. The leader's posture stiffened, as if they recognized the change in the child's aura. "Stay back," the child said, their voice now carrying an echo of authority that seemed to shake the very air. "I don't want to hurt you, but I will if I have to." The leader seemed to hesitate, clearly unsure of how to proceed. The wanderer watched in amazement as the child's power began to manifest in front of them. They could see it now, the raw energy that had been building up inside the child, waiting for the right moment to be unleashed. It wasn't just the child's will. It was something much more primal, something tied to the very essence of who they were. "I am not your prisoner," the child said firmly, their voice growing stronger with each word. "I will not be controlled." The leader stared at the child, their helmet reflecting the glow of the power that now surrounded them. After a long pause, they took a step back, raising a hand to signal their soldiers. "Let's go," the leader said, their voice reluctant. "For now we leave you to your choices, but remember, child, your father will not give up on you." As the soldiers retreated, the vehicles slowly turned and began to move away, disappearing into the desert. The child remained standing, their power still crackling in the air, but their expression had softened. They looked over at the wanderer, a mix of relief and uncertainty in their eyes. "They're gone," the wanderer said quietly, their gaze fixed on the retreating vehicles. "For now." The child nodded, their bodies still trembling slightly from the release of energy. I didn't mean to do that. I don't know what's happening to me." The wanderer placed a hand on the child's shoulder, offering a comforting touch. "You're learning to control it, you'll get there. But you don't have to do it alone." The child smiled weakly, their face full of gratitude. "Thank you," they whispered. The wanderer nodded, feeling the weight of everything that had happened settle into their bones. The journey ahead was still uncertain, but one thing was clear. The child had found their strength, and together, they would face whatever came next.